And you are live.
Pinch yourself and make sure.
So good morning, everyone. This is the State House Advisory Committee, the Legislative State House Advisory Committee. And we haven't really formally formed a chair. And so I'd like to turn it over right now to our legal counsel, Becky Wasserman, and she's going to explain the charge and all the committee itself.
Okay, great. So Becky Wasserman, Legislative Counsel. Would you all like me to do the election first or go through the charge first?
Go through the charge first, Becky?
Okay. So I see how the screen sharing works here. Okay. Can you all see that? Does it have to be?
It's pretty minute.
Okay. I was afraid of
We're gonna
that.
trust
Let's see. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to go through. There's statutory language that set up the committee, and then there was some language in the Capitol bill, which was Act 50, that passed this past session, delegating a responsibility to the committee for a report. So in terms of the statutory authority that authorizes the committee, this year in the Capitol bill, there was also some changes to the membership of the committee. So in 2 VSA 651, the committee is established, and in the Capitol bill, it changed from 11 members to 13 members. So the change was adding an additional House and Senate member. So there are 4 House members appointed by the Speaker and 4 members of the Senate appointed by the Committee on Committees. The remaining members are the Chair of the Board of Trustees of the Friends of the Vermont State House, the Director of the Vermont Historical Society, the Director of the Council on the Arts, Commissioner of BGS, and the Sergeant at Arms. As we'll do in a moment, you all will elect a new chair, which is done biennially, and a quorum consists of 7 members. That was the last change that was made in the Capitol bill with respect to the statute. In terms of meeting, you meet at least one time when the General Assembly is in session and at least one time when they are not, but you can also meet at the call of the chair. The Commissioner of BGS shall keep minutes of the meetings, and the committee has the assistance of Legislative Counsel. Section 652 allows the legislative members of the committee to receive a per diem compensation and expense reimbursement. And then finally, 653 has the functions of the committee. So you all are consulted on activities relating to acquisition and care of paintings and historic artifacts and furnishings, the refurbishing, renovation, preservation, and expansion of the building and its interior. The committee also is responsible for developing a plan for the acquisition or commission of artwork for the State House, and that has to represent Vermont's diverse people and history. And then the Sergeant at Arms and BGS are responsible for discharging their other responsibilities with respect to the interior of the building that are laid out in 2 VSA section 62 and 29 VSA section 154 in consideration of the committee's recommendations, which are advisory. And I can bring up those sections if you'd like me to do that as well. The committee this year on the Capitol bill was tasked with coming up with a report. So you all will be reviewing and making recommendations on any space and design proposals for the State House. As you're aware, Freeman, French, and Freeman did a legislative space study in April of this year, and the review that you do will take that into account. You will also be asked to consult with legislators, legislative staff, and other stakeholders on space needs. For this report, you'll have the assistance of a planning architect from BGS And the report will be due August 15th and will be submitted to the Joint Legislative Management Committee, Joint Rules, and the House and Senate Institutions Committees. Are there any questions?
So I don't think so, Becky.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the screen share. And then we can move on to electing a chair. So are there any nominations for the chair position?
Madam Ledge Council Temporary Chair, I would like to move the name of Alice Emmons as the chair of the committee for several reasons. From a legislative perspective, she has probably the most knowledge of the rest of the legislators that are in the room. She has been working overtime over the past few months trying to get to the bottom of this particular picture. And there's a rumor that she was actually here when the State House was built in 1850. But with that, I would like to nominate Representative Emmons as the chair of this committee.
Great. Are there any other nominations? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of Representative Emmons serving as the chair for the Legislative Advisory Committee on the State House, please say aye or raise your hand, although it's really hard for me to see.
Aye.
I abstain.
Great. So Representative Emmons is the new chair of the committee, so I will hand it over to you.
We're switching seats.
We gotta do a switch here.
My face. I'll get it for you.
So, let's get settled. So, thank you all. I think the first thing we do, number one, I'm so glad that so many of us are here in public, in person. It feels so good. I know we're not in the State House, but this is the next best thing, and it's so good to see all of you here in person, even though we're seated around a table and we're still only seeing the top folks. At least we're here in person. It feels really good. And I think for this kind of work, this type of work that's going to be before us for the next 2 months, we do need to be in person as much as possible. So there's been a lot of work to date done in terms of the moving pieces of how we get ourselves, the legislature, back into the building come January. And then there's also discussions about how we do the space needs long-term, which is also another part of this. So before I get into a little bit more further discussion about where our attention should be over the next few weeks, I think there are folks here that know each other and there are folks that don't. And I think it would be very, very helpful to go around the table and introduce ourselves and who we represent. So I'm Representative Alice Emmons, Chair of the House Corrections and Institutions Committee. We'll go around this way.
So I'm State Senator Joe Benning. I represent the Caledonia District. I also chair the counterpart for Alice's committee, the Senate Institutions Committee. And I'm also one of those people that is fanatically attached to this wonderful historic structure that we're all in charge of making recommendations on. I very much look forward to working with the group.
I'm Senator Ruth Hardy. I represent the Addison District, and I serve on the Finance Committee and the Health and Welfare Committee. So it's my first building committee, although I did some work on trying to get our portraits diversified. So I'm hoping we get to that at some point too.
Yeah, it's part of our charge.
Yes.
Very exciting. I'm Allison Clarkson. I'm one of the 3 senators from the Windsor County District. And actually, this was my first committee I was appointed to in 2005 to the State House Committee, where I served with David and Dick Mazza and Phil Scott. So that's how I got to know. So it's sort of lovely to come around and be serving on this again. I serve as Vice Chair of Senate Economic Development, and on government operations, and I'm the majority leader in the Senate.
And I'm Representative John Bartholomew. I represent Heartland, Windsor, and West. It's a long time since I said this.
Yeah.
Heartland, Windsor, and West Windsor. And for years, I was on agriculture and forestry. This biennium, I'm on House Transportation. I'm also a member of the House Committee on Rules. And I'm thrilled to be back for another biennium on this committee.
I'm John Dumville. I live in Royalton. I'm co-chair of the Friends of the Vermont State House. I used to work at the Division for Historic Preservation, managing the state-owned historic sites, and are familiar with a number of you people from testifying before your committee. And we've got some important work to do.
I'm David Sheets, the state curator. I've been around for nearly 40 years when this committee was actually called the State House Preservation Committee before it was renamed at a later time. And it's a privilege to be discussing things that are still challenging the State House all these many years. Things that we never would have dreamed of back when I started.
So let's go to the two folks on Zoom here. We have Karen Middleman and then Steve Perkins. So Karen, why don't you go first?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Karen Middleman, Director of the Vermont Arts Council. And some of you know I've been in Vermont for going on 4 years. But before that, earlier in my career, I spent almost a dozen years as a museum curator. So historic preservation and collections are very near and dear to my heart. So happy to be here.
Good morning. Good morning, Steve Perkins, the director of the Vermont Historical Society. In this weird hybrid world, I apologize for not being with you in person. It's hard to go from a full slate of Zoom meetings in Barrie and somehow transport myself to Montpelier and then use the transport beam to get back to Barrie again. So I look forward to seeing you in person next time. So I've been the director of the Vermont Historical Society since 2015. Before that, museum directors and curators, I was in Bennington for a number of years as well.
I don't know how you two want to go, the BGS folks.
Yeah, I'll introduce myself. I'm Stephen Fry. I am a senior facility architect and planner with Buildings and General Services. I am here to be of service, and I'm very honored. So I look forward to meeting you all and rolling up our sleeves together and figuring out a whole bunch of things.
My name is Jennifer Fitch, and I was appointed to be the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services at the beginning of this year by Governor Scott. I also served as the Deputy Commissioner since 2017. I am a licensed professional engineer. I've been working for state service since 2004. It is an honor and a privilege to both be the BGS Commissioner as well as be a member of this committee. And I look forward to supporting your successful outcomes and hopefully meeting your goal of having everybody return to the State House.
Hi, I'm Anthony Polina, Senator from Washington County. I serve as Vice Chair of Government Operations Committee and on the Agriculture Committee. And it's just nice to be with people, with real people in real time in a real place.
Yay!
Yay. Hi, I'm Butch Shaw. I represent Brandon, Pittsford, and Sudbury. I did a stint on institutions and corrections. And like John, I got moved upstairs to be vice chair of transportation this year, and I'm really glad to see everybody. It's nice to see people.
Good morning. I'm Janet Miller. I'm the Sergeant at Arms at the Vermont State House, and I was elected in 2015 and continuing my duties as Sergeant at Arms through the next year of the biennium before another election. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. So let me just whoops, someone, Tate just popped in.
Ooh, that's
on
surreal.
a ski slope.
He looks like a
Is he there?
ghost.
Is Tay there?
He looks frozen.
Yes, he does.
But he looks like a ghost.
Tay, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I was just waiting for the noise to settle down so you could hear me.
So we just went around the table to introduce ourselves and
Yes, ma'am. I've been here from the very beginning. I was just had my video off because, as you can see with my wonderful internet, it doesn't actually transmit very well.
okay. So it's all yours to introduce yourself, Tay.
Good morning. My name is Tay Southworth. I'm a mechanical engineer with the Department of Buildings and General Services in the Design and Construction Division.
Thank you. So Tay is our go-to person for the HVAC system replacement, but we'll get to that. Let me just give you a little bit of background in terms of what Senator Benning and myself, and also Representative Janet Ansel is part of this committee, but she was tied up with Joint Fiscal Committee at the same time. And the reason I mentioned Representative Ansel is she is part of the the Legislative Joint Management Committee that oversees the operations of the legislature, be it the Legislative Council, the Joint Fiscal Office, how that interacts with us as legislators. Senator Benning is also on that committee. I don't think there's anyone else here. They've been talking about what are we going to do with space, with getting us all back into the building or in Montpelier come January. And then it came to the attention that there is an advisory committee, that part of the role of the advisory committee is also to look at renovations that would occur in the building. So the thinking from the Joint Management Committee was, let's have the advisory committee really vet all of the issues and make a recommend and come back to the Joint Management Committee with some recommendations in terms of how we can get back into the building and function as a legislative body come January, as well as what do we do long-term for space needs. So with that being said, one of the thoughts for us as an advisory committee is to really have these heart-to-heart conversations and discussions about what if we did this? What if we did this? What if we moved this? What if we operated this way? And this is just my thinking, and you folks may just say, no, you're totally off base, Alice. But maybe what we could look at for the short term, which is to get us back, get the legislature back in Montpelier and get us back here in person in a safe manner. What are the options of how to do this? There's option A, option B, option C, option D, whatever. And present those options to the Joint Management Committee because they will make the final decision. They and the Joint Rules Committee will make the final decision. But our role is to vet all the possibilities and make recommendations. Now, we may all coalesce around one recommendation, or there may be a variety of recommendations. So that would be the short term. The long term sort of builds on that short term, possibly. What do we do about the space needs going forward post-COVID for space in the State House? Again, we could do different options. Could do option A, option B, option C, whatever. But it's our role to really dig into this pretty deep and figure out the best approach. There's a lot of history that has occurred. I know Janet's going to go through some of this, but last year in the legislature, we weren't sure what our needs were going to be. So we worked with the leadership, with the institutions committees, with the appropriations committee. There is some space that has been put aside for this past legislative session and the upcoming legislative session for legislative use. One of the spaces is here in 109. There's some other space over here. There's also some space in 133 State Street for legislative use. That could be used for committee rooms, that could be used for overflow, we don't know yet. We'll be vetting that. And then this past legislative session in the Capitol bill, we worked on agreements with BGS, with the commissioner, to do a swap with the fifth floor of 133 State Street, which we had indicated last session that we would have access to, we negotiated a swap with BGS that they would move up to the 5th floor of 133 State Street from their building, which is 2 Aiken and 4 Aiken, which is right at the top of Aiken Ave. It's that green house. It's right across from the Pink Lady. So the thinking is that possibly 2 and 4 Aiken could be used for legislative council. We don't know. So that's the lay of the land currently from the Capitol bill. So that's as far as I'm going to go at this point. Are there any questions before Janet kind of gives us a little bit more scope of what's happening here? Some of us have been in the throes of this for 2 months.
A year.
Well, yeah, some of us longer than that. And we need to bring all of you folks up to speed here pretty quickly. And then figure out our committee meetings going forward and what we want to focus on for that. Is that fair to say?
It's fair to say.
Questions? Thoughts?
Just to amplify something, many of you may have seen the Freeman report. The narrative behind that report began with an assumption that COVID-19 was in the midst of us. And so the proposals that were put forth were based on that narrative. COVID-19 is not with us, so one of the tricks here is to learn that the COVID-19 discussion has to morph into something different. We all knew that there were space problems in the State House, but designing committee rooms in the State House to accommodate COVID-19 social distancing is just not possible. We don't have the money for that, nor do we have the time to be able to do that. But the flip side of that is we have committee rooms that have capacity limits for creature comfort purposes, and trying to figure out how to go back into the building in the best way we can has to have a narrative over how we approach it. And so the language, if you will, is morphing into airflow, HVAC systems, trying to accommodate rooms that are pretty limited, but do so in a way that makes sense and keeps everybody happy. And that's probably the biggest trick of all, is the keeping people happy. Our committee at the end of the session took testimony from lobbyists, from press, and various people who came in to tell us that if they were not back in the building the way they normally would be, at least one reporter made it very clear that they were bringing a lawsuit against us because they didn't want to have that limitation. So it's a tricky minefield to walk through, but this committee is actually charged with trying to come up with the proper narrative and getting the conversation moving with that narrative so that we have a basic understanding of what we're trying to do. But the idea of doing it via social distancing of 6 feet space between people, we all have to recognize, I think, maybe it's just me having that opinion, but I don't think we can start with that as the premise, because that is literally impossible under the circumstances.
Anything else? So our agenda is broken down into the space. IT is really important as part of this. We have Kevin Moore, our IT guru. And then we'll get into the airflow and the HVAC system, because that's kind of integral to some of this. And that's where BGS and Stephen and Tay will work with that. So Janet, why don't you give us the background and talk to us about some of the space?
Yep. So thank you very much. I hope I don't duplicate what Chair Emmons and Senator Benny also said, but I'm just going to kind of start to try to pull it all together. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of things that affect other things. There's a lot of work we've been doing all for the last year and a half to try to make things the best that we can. So the overview was what space that we have available, and Chair Emmons referenced the 133 State Street and this building, which is 109. And we have one, two, three, four rooms here in this building. And the legislature also has 2 and 4 Aiken. 4 Aiken is a building that sits behind 2 Aiken. 2 Aiken is the house where the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services is. So it's that little house that's right before the tax department, just for your reference in thinking about it. 4 Aiken is an old, what was it, Jennifer?
It was an old carriage barn.
It was an old carriage barn. So that building has some limitations, but it's part of ours now and it can be used in some good ways. So a few key points to the discussion are, of course, the Ashrae Guidelines. And the chairs of institutions last year asked Buildings and General Services to do an Ashrae evaluation here at the State House. These other rooms have Ashrae Standards too.
Could you explain what Ashrae is?
Yeah, and I will let others get into the details of it, but I will tell you what it stands for. So it's the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning. And this organization develops best practices for technical standards to improve building services of engineering, energy efficiency, and indoor air quality.
You got it. That's spot on.
Okay. So Buildings and General Services were able to do that for us, and they provided us with our capacity numbers in the State House and in these other spaces. And then after we can go into more detail of what you want to talk about. So in terms of the short-term needs, this refers to the legislature coming back in January. But from my perspective, there's a short-term need, which is opening the State House as of July 6th. So I'm just going to tell you what we've proposed that we'd like to do. I've proposed, because I don't know where everybody wants to go in this whole big picture. So I've proposed we will open on July 6th. We will follow the Ashrae recommendation given to us by Buildings and General Services for our spaces. Part of that is keeping kind of people moving forward through the building, because some of our spaces, the big lobbies and the hallways, don't allow for a whole lot of people to be congregating and staying in their places. So we try to be accommodating to the public by still moving people along. So as of July 6th, the public can come in and take a self-guided tour, just take a look at the State House during our regular business hours, which will be 7:45 to 4:15. We will just kind of try to move people along. We will have 4 larger committee rooms available in the State House on July 15th for legislative committee work. These will be set up like rooms 10 and 11. If most of you recall what that setup looked like. It will have less people in it. Some of the people will, one room holds 49 and 43. So those will be our largest groups in the lounge, because we'll be using, and those rooms are rooms 10 and 11, the legislative lounge, because that's one of our bigger spaces, and room 9, which used to be the coat room where everybody hang their coats in the lockers, and what used to be the mail room. So those 4 spaces will now be legislative committee rooms. At this time, we aren't opening those rooms up to the public at this point because we have to take care of our own right now. But we will be talking to leadership about the House chamber use for events that people still like to come to the State House for award ceremonies, girls' state debate teams. Well, the girls' state is actually happening this week, but we weren't able to accommodate that this year. But hopefully next year we'll be back in the swing. So there are many things to consider about coming back in January, and as Senator Benning said, people have different views and personal feelings about the post-pandemic. I hear about a lot of it. And decisions any decisions that are made have a domino effect. You wouldn't believe this affects that, affects IT, affects our cafeteria. It just snowballs into something that feels kind of very daunting. And so I'm thankful to have all of this help with this committee. Well, something to note in all of our thinking here is that the State House will be getting a new HVAC system. And we have a timeline for that, but it's still a ways down the road. So that all needs to be taken into consideration of when things can be done here at the State House and what we need to consider. Representative Emmons had spoken about maybe different things that we could do, different things to think about. Yes.
Janet, what is the timeline for the new HVAC system?
Get into it.
Oh, okay.
It's a couple years. It's not January.
Got it.
We'll get into it.
So one of the things that I had been working on and talking to different people about were some possible options, maybe something to kind of set us up for somewhere to at least start. And I don't know, I'll just kind of lay it out here and we could see if that would be something people would want to talk about. But one of the options would be to only use the State House and follow the HVAC room limitation based on the Ashrae standards. We could use this 109, this building, 109, and leaving the lounge and room 11, those larger committee spaces for bigger committee work that we're going to be doing this interim and also in January. We could keep more committees in the State House and use this 109 space for the public, or probably an easier place for that would be maybe 133. There's a little bit of security issues here that makes it a little more difficult. There's also talk about tearing down some committee walls in the Freeman, French, and Freeman report, which would have to probably happen yesterday to get that done. And then another option would be to use the State House 109 and 133, spreading out committees all over and using, following the HVAC limitations. And of course, option 4, ignore all HVAC airflow analysis and come back as before. So I know that seems like a lot of information. For the long-term space needs, there's a lot of discussion that would have to happen around that. And some of these that I've heard that include more public space, larger committee rooms to accommodate, more offices because we have more people joining the staff here at the State House. The cafeteria also has its limitations for the size. You all know how crowded it gets in our cafeteria. We have security and safety for our larger groups that come to the State House. Safety and security for me is my responsibility, and so it's always at the top of my mind as to how we can keep things safe here at the State House. We have our school groups, we have advocacy groups, our lobbyists, and the press should all be considered when thinking about our long-term needs for the future of the Vermont State House. So that's a lot of information, and I hope that it can kind of strike up, pose some questions, and I'm here to help and answer any questions I can.
So I think this is a good starting point. I think one thing that Janet was really clear about, there's so much to this, and where do we start? And where do you put the parameters around the discussion, not to limit it, but sort of really consolidate what is happening and put it down into a logical sense so that people aren't all over the map. Right now, everybody is all over the map, and that's the role of this committee, is to draw all that together and really do it in a structured way and do a good recommendation in a real structured way. That would be my goal. I hope it would be the goal of the members here, that we can really vet everything through and think it through and provide some solid recommendations. I think one thing that's important, the list that you just gave, Janet, about this here, that would be good to have that as part, send that out to our committee members.
Okay.
For this. And we will be getting into the HVAC system. This is really, really complicated. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to determine some of the space needs and recommendations that we're going to make. So it's integral to that. So questions? This would be a good time to start processing. So Karen, and then Allison, and then John.
You're muted, Karen.
Deja vu.
Right. So is there a summary of the Ashrae recommendations that can be shared with the committee?
Yes.
And then also, it'd be good for me at least to wrap my mind around what are the assumptions behind the Ashrae recommendations? Were they recommendations for in the thick of COVID or for a post-pandemic world or a world where we're still guarding against variants? Or what's the set of assumptions that we're operating under when we think about HVAC recommendations for the building? That would be helpful for me.
Can BGS weigh in on that?
Yeah, I can speak and then Tay can follow on if I miss something. So BGS Commissioner. So the Ashrae standards are really best practices. They are not directly related to COVID. And it's important for folks to know that while this is a best practice, there are no code requirements in the state based on airflows. And so for folks in the room, our current HVAC systems and air handler units went in basically the 70s and the 80s, right? Where this didn't exist at that time. And so, right, code or best practices, right? Those get developed over time. And so Ashrae has come out with best practices. Tay applied that standard from Ashrae to each of these different rooms to come up with the maximum capacity that a room could hold based on these best practices. But it's important to know that this is not an adopted code inside the state of Vermont. So it's really advisory only. And it's also, I just want to say it out loud so folks know, right? You've been operating within the State House with these airflows all along. We will improve them, obviously. We will meet those best practices once we do the new HVAC upgrade. But this is what you have for current state. And so it's really advisory only. Tay, is there something that I missed?
If I can.
Sorry.
No, I just want to interject. This was sent to us and Mike Ferrant sent it to us last Friday. This is the airflow.
I missed
that was done. It was done the last week of the session. And it breaks down every room, pretty much every room in the State House. So it's in Mike Ferrant's email.
It's also
sent to us Friday,
I think, and it's also posted to the committee's website for today.
What's our access here, Mike?
Yeah. Can we get online?
You have all of the wireless networks that are available to you in the State House available here as well. So you should have State House Public if that's what you used to, or VT Lake in-house, and it should automatically connect if you
So the important things that the committee needs is this airflow breakdown, the Freeman report, which is also available at Mike's email, and the language of our charge. And that was in his email as well. So that's really important to have.
And once we get into this, for the folks that haven't had the opportunity to review it, you're going to notice that there's a couple of columns. One is the airflow just based on what the systems naturally bring in on their own, how they're programmed. You'll also see there's another column. Some rooms have an override capability. And what that means is we can have a BGS employee that's basically overriding the system, so it's bringing in more fresh air than it would on its own, if that makes sense, programmed. And so if the committee and folks decide that they want to utilize some of these rooms with the override capacity, we can do that, but we need to make sure we have dedicated BGS employees at the time that this is occurring. So that's just something else for folks to be aware of.
And you can do that override for more of the Senate committee rooms, but not the House committee rooms.
And it's based on the
It's a different system.
Yeah.
So Tay had wanted to weigh in before I interrupted him. So Tay?
The commissioner got it very accurately. There is no code. This is best practice. It's based on 5 CFM per person and 0.06 CFM per square foot. But as Janet kindly mentioned, you can go right back to doing what you were doing 2 years ago, because that's what we've been doing all along. It's not a code requirement. Last week, we gave the design firm that's studying this problem the charge to provide enough air for the current committee assignments, as well as the pre-COVID assignments for the large meeting rooms, 9, 10, 11, plus 4 people to cover the people that are testifying and observing and whatever. That's kind of an initial target. If you come up with some other things that you want to do, we can go ahead and add that, their list of things to add to the ventilation requirements. So I'm designing for 2 years ago to meet the current recommendations.
So I think our agenda is moving into the airflow and HVAC system, which is fine, and then we can do IT. So Karen, do you have anything else on this particular?
No, thank you very much.
Okay, so we're going to be going more in depth on this. So we'll go to Allison and then John.
Thanks. I'd like to build on Karen's question, which is around assumptions. So given this is best practices, we now have a vaccination situation where, you know, many of us could be, who are fully vaccinated, could be in what was, you know, where we were 16 months ago. So I'm just curious I think one of the things we need to talk about is what are the assumptions we want to build in terms of vaccination, and whether we require, if you require to be fully vaccinated to be in the State House, that would enable you to be in the current spaces, is my assumption. And so that's an assumption I'd also like to have us discuss, is vaccinated, unvaccinated, and what that would enable us to do.
And I just want the committee to know that this doesn't have anything to do with COVID-19. These are best practices. Just
I understand that. That's,
I just want to make sure folks are aware of.
I'm clear on that. But it is, that's one of the assumptions I think that needs discussion is, you know, a vaccinated population has a different use opportunity than an unvaccinated population.
And then the ramifications of that is, what's the role of the sergeant of arms to determine if someone is vaccinated or not, and someone isn't, do they have access to the space? And what's the role of the committee chairs to say, you're not vaccinated, you're not allowed in the committee room?
Right.
So those are some real dicey, sticky wickets.
I just
Or not.
corral some of that conversation. One of the things we have learned is a great benefit to us is our Zoom capability. If COVID or any variant raises its head, we immediately can go back to Zoom. So I don't think we need to get that part of the conversation involved in these conversations at all. However, the issue of vaccinated versus unvaccinated, there may be an additional question of, is that constitutionally acceptable? I'm not sure we've reached that discussion yet in the legal world, but it's part of the consideration in the mix.
So as folks can start to see, there's a lot of layers to this we're going to get into. So is this on this, Stephen? Okay, Stephen, and then we'll get to you, John.
It's just a supplemental thought. One of the things also to recognize is that the airflow recommendations are all about well-being and healthiness in space, and the CFM that Tay was mentioning is it Tay, cubic feet per minute is yep. And I don't know if everyone's familiar with what that means, but it's a certain amount of air per person on just that, and that means airflow, right?
It's a volume of air. It's 1 cubic foot every minute.
Got it. And I think part of the thing that I was just wondering about is there's been innovations like the Zoom capabilities that so many of us used. The other thing that we saw maybe going to medical facilities is infrared scanners for temperature control. We could do things in the future just to understand if people are well or not well, if they're presenting fever symptoms. That might not be a bad thing to know about, but it also comes with many scaffolding, cascading questions that I know that I can't solve for, but it's part of the technology side of things. It's, I guess, health technology. I just wanted to interject.
So that's a good segue into Stephen's role. Stephen will be working with us intimately in terms of where we're headed in our discussions and our policy thinking and recommendations. Stephen, as you know, is with BGS, but BGS has offered him to us to be our right-hand person to really help us with these technical questions and think out of the box possibly. So he's a resource for us. Okay, John and then Ruth.
Janet had mentioned the security issues regarding space in this building. Is that for members and staff or just the public or what?
Well, members and staff would have access to this building.
Talking about access for the public?
Yes. I mean, as you know, when people come in, they come in through the security on that second floor.
Yep.
Thought that's what you meant.
Yep. And John, if you remember when Governor Shumlin was governor, it was Governor Shumlin, right? There was a breach in this building where there was some activity out on the State House lawn. I believe it was Governor Shumlin.
Was it? I
Yes.
forgot.
Scott.
It was.
I forgot.
No, it was Shumlin.
It was Shumlin, and there was a breach. And the breach was, they got in through the elevator and ended up on the 5th floor and occupied the governor's office. So since then, there has been an upgrade in security. You have no access to the elevators until you sign in and can only go to the certain floor that you're going to. So if you're going to have the public in here, you've got the public that is here with our constitutional officers because you have the attorney generals here, you have the state treasurers here, and on the 5th floor, you have the governor. The 5th floor for the governor is state police. The access to the building is BGS security. So if anything happens in the building, the state police deal with the governor only. And then the rest is with BGS security. Okay, so those are the layers. So if you want the public to come in here, they're gonna have to go through the desk like you did downstairs, get a badge, get access to the elevator to only come to this floor. Because we're commingling the public with our executive branch and our constitutional officers. So you have to take that into consideration.
There's other dominoes that fall with that. For instance, as Steve referenced, having the technology at the State House door to see somebody's temperature, that's great, except you have to have an employee sitting there that we don't have allotments for at the moment. So those same dominoes affect all of these other buildings that we're talking about.
I would just so some of you who may have not been here, we have had the capability to do that. We had machines to do that. They were top of the line equipment at the time when we were trying to decide what we were doing a year ago. They have a little bit of limitations. They're not robots, but you know, a cup of coffee can set it off. So we'd have to do some tweaking on that, but we still have the devices to do that. Just so the committee's aware.
And we,
Is this for this, Allison?
yes, on these machines, I mean, the same thing could be with a Q code where you're registered either with the CDC or with the Department of Health that you have been vaccinated. So there are ways that we can do that also very easily and very cheaply.
Right.
Ruth?
Back to the
Is this?
security thing.
Okay.
Presumably, if we are in here, then another factor will be Capitol Police would be involved, right?
Right.
Yep.
So there's lots of layers to security.
Look, we have.
And some committees have worked on that. That's why we have Butch. Ruth and then Butch.
Thank you. So that was helpful to know what else is in this building. I mean, I knew the governor's office was here, but I didn't know what else was here. So getting that kind of information, I don't know what else is in 133? I think it's the tax department.
It's the tax and
BGS.
And BGS.
This floor, I will say though, it's another good one to talk about. The tax folks are extremely secure and they need to be per federal requirements.
Right.
So one of the things, if you decide to use 133, we'll just have to have very clear protocols about how people enter and exit the building.
I guess I would suggest also, and you may already know all of this, but looking at what other states do, because I worked in another legislature earlier in my career, and they had offices in different buildings and mixed with the executive branch and everything. And I think, so there must be models for how they do it. Obviously, our buildings are different, but in terms of some comments about, do we just go back to what we had before COVID, given our vaccination rates? I would argue strongly against doing that because there were already air quality issues in a lot of the rooms. I believe one of the House committees actually moved to a different room because there were health issues with some of the members in that committee. And there were issues in your committee room, I believe, with radon or something like that. And, I mean, Anthony and I serve on Senate, or I did serve on Senate Ag, and that room is just the epitome of the worst room. People would just fall
It's the best airflow of anybody.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
That's the irony, because
The
people
best
would just
airflow.
fall asleep in there because of the lack of oxygen. And it was just really, well, and
Go there, Allison. I know where you're going. Don't go.
I know I set that up for you, Alice.
You knew what I was going to say, right?
But, yeah, I know what you were going to say too. Anyway, just the air was really bad in all the rooms before COVID. And now that there's another layer on it with COVID, I think that it just can't go back to where we were. And one, just to follow up on the vaccinations, I do think we have to say something about vaccinations, whether it's just we strongly encourage or there's a self-certification, there's a public thing. If you're not vaccinated, we ask that you testify via Zoom. We ask that school groups that have unvaccinated kids refrain from coming, et cetera. There has to be something about vaccinations. And we just have to be clear about what that is.
So I'd just like to speak to air quality real quick. So we manage air quality right in all state buildings under our jurisdiction at BGS. And this isn't to validate or unvalidate, if you will, how people feel. A lot of times people will feel like there's an air quality issue, and we will go and do extensive testing and we won't find anything. So with respect to the State House, we have found radon. That is true. Low levels. And when we open doors and other things, the radon levels are low enough. It's nothing you need to worry about. You just have to manage movement. In terms of other air quality concerns, we certainly have mold, right? We had mold a couple of summers ago or 3 summers ago, and we had to do an extensive remediation. Over and above that, we have not found any other air quality issues going on within the State House, and we've done extensive testing. Stephen Hubbs is amazing, and he's our environmental engineer who does all the testing. So I know there's been concerns about air quality. We've been very diligent in testing. Sometimes there's things like allergies that happen. So you might be sitting next to someone that has a cat at home. My son's really allergic to cats, and so is my husband, even though we have 3. So sometimes people bring things on their body. Perfumes will be another thing that will usually bother people. And so sometimes there's irritants in the room that are not really based on the air quality, but might be based on who you're sitting next to or is in the room.
Well, so that's what I was going to ask you. Have you done the air quality testing in a full room?
We have, actually. And if at some point you'd like Stephen Hubbs to come and talk more about, from his perspective, air quality and the testing he's done in the last 4 years, we're happy to have him come in and he can talk about that in more detail.
Okay, because often the rooms are just so packed you can't even move in them, which doesn't seem safe from a fire safety issue either. I mean, there are other safety.
That is another, now we're going to
go down that road.
She's diving deep.
Yeah, you don't want to go down that road. That will be a mess. Janet?
I was wondering if Tay could weigh in and tell the members how it works when he drops more air into a room.
Sure.
Based on the capacity and what it does to the room as far as making it cold.
You are correct. So Tay, I'm gonna slide this one over to you, but the Sergeant at Arms is very correct in that bringing in more fresh air it does good things on one side, and then it's bringing in more fresh air and oxygen to the people in the room, but it can have negative consequences to things like creating too dry of an air, and then you get like itchy, watery eyes, and there's other things that can happen that are sort of on the negative side of bringing more fresh air in the wintertime. But Tay can speak better to that. Tay, you want to jump in and talk about that?
Sure. At the beginning, a little technical. Right now, we have 8 air handlers in the building. 6 of the air handlers are constant volume systems.
We can't hear you very well.
I'm sorry. We have 8 air handlers in the State House. 6 of them are constant volume systems, 2 of them are variable volume systems. And there's 2 things that happen. So in the constant volume systems, we vary the temperature of the air that's going to the space to maintain the temperature. When the temperature outside is really nice, like it is today, we bring in lots and lots of outside air because we can use it for free cooling. But when it's really cold outside, we bring in what's called the minimum amount of air. And all those calculations are based on minimum outside airflow, because that's the worst case that I had to work against, because you might be in there on a day when it's 20 below zero, or in August when it's hazy, hot, and humid. The Senate committee rooms are on a VAV system. So there's actually 2 things there that can happen. One is the outside airflow from the air handler changes, but we can actually increase the airflow on the variable volume box. So in the committee rooms of the Senate, we actually vary the amount of constant temperature air as opposed to varying the temperature of a constant amount of air. So when we override those rooms for the Senate committee rooms to improve the airflow, we're assuming that there's going to be enough load that the temperature is going to be comfortable.
And what happens, what can be some side effects, Tay, that happens when you bring in more cold air in the wintertime?
The relative humidity is a measurement of the air's ability to hold moisture. So if we bring in cold air that's already dry and we warm it up, it becomes even drier. And you end up with dry, itchy eyes, chapped skin. It can also cause the mucous membranes in your nose to dry out, making you more susceptible to colds and viruses.
Moisturizing masks. Clearly this.
So, Butch.
So I'd like to back up to security for just a second, Madam Chair, because you kind of skimmed over the various levels of security that we have around us. And I don't know how deep a dive you want to get into that. Obviously not today, because it's a really big conversation, but Alice mentioned BGS security. That's one form of security. State police, another form, another assignment. The city of Montpelier, another form of security for us. And last but not least is the Capitol Police, the State House Police, which is another form.
And sheriffs.
And the sheriffs, which are another form of security for us. And
Supreme Court.
they work together, but everybody has a certain different level of responsibility. So when you say BGS security, that doesn't necessarily mean people security, which is rather shocking. It means building security. Jennifer, am I okay?
You're doing good.
Okay. So it doesn't give us it gives us a great level of confidence in the work they do, but not necessarily in the work that we're asking them to do. So it gets pretty grainy and pretty deep, but it's not a conversation for today, but it might be a conversation that we want to have a little later on to understand who's providing what and what they can provide. Some of it's shocking.
So we've transitioned to the airflow and HVAC system. So where we are at with that at this point, there was $500,000 that was put in the capital budget. Year before, we do a 2-year budget in the capital bill. So it was this previous 2-year budget. We put in $500,000 for BGS to go out with an RFP to figure out what type of system do we need. So it's really what are we going to do? Come back with some design recommendations in terms of what the system would look like. That was $500,000. They have just entered into a contract with Freeman French Freeman to do that design work. It's not to do construction. It's not to go out to bid, to go out to construction. It's only figuring out what are we going to do. So Freeman French and Freeman started that work about 3 weeks ago, a month ago. And they're going to report back to BGS this coming session, during the session, and it won't be really until next summer that we have a better idea of how we're going to move forward. We do have 2.5 million that we have put in our capital budget for the HVAC system for FY23. So that would entail covering, we hope, the cost of the new system, but we don't know because we're not going to know until French Freeman does all their work and reports back to us. So there is a timeline, and Jennifer, I don't know if this is still the timeline or not, but this is what Janet just gave me. That French Freeman has reviewed the project schedule. And schematic design, which is your first layer, this is the possibility of what you could do, is going to be available October 24th of this year, middle of October. The design development, which is really figuring out, you take those schematic designs and then you start really getting into the nuts and bolts and then figure out what the real design is going to be so that it can get you to construction documents. The design development is not going to be completed until April 2022. And then your construction documents, which gets you to the point of being able to go out to bid for the project to construct it, isn't going to be done till a year from now, July 15th. And then they can go out to bid to see what entity can do the work. That will be in October of next year. And then the construction can begin, but can they do the construction when we're in session or not? And the projected completion is end of February, beginning of March in 2024. So we have that's the time frame from French Freeman.
May I add some points to that? So that may be the current schedule, but is very much subject to change. And a lot of this is going to be based on what the preference is of the legislative body. So a couple of things to note. We are going to do everything we can to accelerate and expedite this project because we know how important it is. And even though a year for design sounds like a lot, remember, we have 6 air handler units on the roof. And if you think about all the vents and the ducts and all of the different types of components that go into HVAC, it's a lot. So it's a lot of work for the State House. And we have to do it delicately, right? Because it's a historic building. And so that means that we have to preserve the historic character, which is what I understand this group was originally created, while we're trying to put in a brand new HVAC system. So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of requirements as we move that project along. When I was speaking with Joe Asia, who is the Director of Design and Construction, who is also partnering with other folks like Tay, who are working on the project, we talked about doing a construction manager. If we do a construction manager, what that allows us to do is hire a contractor now. And that contractor will basically work side by side with the design company, which is great because their goal is to make constructible designs. And what they will be doing is they will be giving input to the design firm along the way. But what it also allows us to do is to start construction before we're done with construction documents, because there's certain things that contractor can do right while we're finishing up the design plans. And so I don't want to overstep my bounds by what I've talked to with Joe, but that was where we were the last time we talked. In terms of how long the project is going to take, it's really going to depend on a lot of factors. Like, are you going to allow construction to occur while you're in session or not? If you do, we get to do construction continuously, right? Which would be the most accelerated schedule, but it would be the most disruptive, right? To you all as a legislative body when you're trying to meet, we have contractors in the building, right? There's certain things we can do. We can do night work. We can do work on the weekends. That tends to be more expensive. So every decision you make has an impact on the schedule and the cost of the project. So if you decide, nope, we don't want it, we don't want contractors in our buildings during the legislative session, what that means is, right, they start construction, they have to kind of button things up, if you will, so the building is somewhat whole for you to come back, right, into committee. And then once you're done at the end of the session, we would come back. So there's going to be lots of options and lots of decisions for the legislative body to make along the way that's going to impact the schedule, right, the cost and different things like that. But we are going to do everything in our power to accelerate the project as quickly as we can.
Should I just,
Allison, Anthony, and John.
So Jennifer, if we hired a construction manager and went that route, I mean, because this strikes me as just way long. So it strikes me that it would be great to understand what we could accomplish with a construction manager.
Absolutely.
And what the time frame would be under that, because I mean, we have school, I mean, I know this is a complicated building. I appreciate that. But I also appreciate the fact that we've had a number of other buildings turn their HVAC systems around much faster than this. And it just does strike me that this is way too long.
There's differences between upgrading an HVAC system, which can be done much more quickly, and actually replacing an entire HVAC system. And it is really, really complicated. And Tay can probably speak more. Tay's not, I don't know what happened to Tay.
I can interject.
Go ahead.
If I may.
Oh, you're still there. I can't see you, Tay.
I'm sorry, I had to turn the video off. It was frozen and it was affecting my audio as well.
So do you want to jump in on the complicated nature of the project, Tay?
Well, the thing is, until October, we don't know how complicated the project is. So all this discussion about schedule is premature.
Okay.
Construction world does not, doesn't operate like our regular world.
Right. I appreciate that.
And it doesn't
that's
operate
good.
like you're building a house either.
That schedule was actually put together by me, not Freeman, French, and Freeman. And it was based on the assumption that during October, I need to confine the construction activities to places that don't affect the large bus groups that visit the building, and that there would be no construction taking place during the legislative session. So once we know what the problem is, once we know what the solutions are, and once we know when and where we can work, we can develop a better construction schedule.
What is this October that he's mentioning?
He's mentioning schematic design.
That's your first layer.
I see. Okay. I thought you said design would be done in April of 2022.
So there's
different levels.
There's different phases. So it goes from conceptual design to schematic design to design development to construction documents. Each one of those is a phase in project delivery in design.
Okay.
And they each represent a certain percentage of design completion.
And the thing about schematic design, which is what Tay was mentioning, is we will very clearly learn the order of magnitude of the big picture in the fall. And that will set the stage for him to level up the overall schedule and put more reality and a finer grain of detail on things. And we just don't know what we don't know. But the other thing I just wanted to, as if I've learned anything from David, is the State House is one of the most beautiful monuments in Vermont. And it's in some way, I'll refer to her as a she, I don't know. But it's a very complicated, wonderful building that has a lot of detail, a lot of complications that are unique to the building. And so that's another reason why it's not just a typical office building that could be retrofitted or the system replaced in more straightforward manners. And that's just something to remember. And then you couple that with the sort of schedule of your activity in the building and all the other subordinate activities that go throughout the year. It is, well, we like to call it Jenga, like space Jenga. It's quite complicated. And so we tend to be very conservative with our schedule estimates for those reasons.
And one of the ugliest parts of the State House is its HVAC system, which started in 1971. It's a 50-year-old system when the State House was renovated and renovated badly, meaning that the restoration of the building began in the 80s and continued through the 90s to undo the ugliness of the renovation of 1971, but they left the HVAC system for the most part alone. It's been adapted over and over again with every restoration, and it is so needed. It's the wild fluctuations of humidity, especially, that have caused so many problems, and that regulation of humidity is perhaps the biggest factor that needs to be addressed by this project. But it is difficult, incredibly difficult, because the system is such a conglomeration of 50 years worth of trying to keep it going. And now it's time for total replacement.
So when you talk about the system, we have a system that was there originally from the 70s. Then it was adapted a little bit in the 80s. So you got another type of system there that's kind of hooked to the 70s.
Right.
Then in the 90s, you have a whole separate system. So you got three different systems there, and they're dealing with different parts of the building. So I want to put this in simple terms for folks about schematic design and design development and construction. Your schematic design is very 30,000 foot level, pretty much. This is the options that you could do. This is what you could do. Then once you decide, you see those schematic designs, you decide, well, let's tweak here, let's do this here, let's accept this. Then you go into your design documents that really filter that out in a deeper level. And once you get those design documents, then you can produce your construction documents, which is again a deeper level. Is that fair to say? That your design is your phase very broad, then you refine it for your, I can never remember the terms, your design development, and then you get into your construction documents. So we're only at the very, very top level. And one of the conversations was, and we don't know if we're going to go there or not, is we may need to put in a summer boiler. If we put in a summer boiler, where are we going to put it? Because right now, we're connected to the heat plant that's behind 120 State Street. And that doesn't help us in the summer.
That's right, because the heat plant gets shut off in the summertime.
So we're clear on that.
So these are the layers. And then if you do that, then you build out to the back of the building, which you then displace people, possibly. And where do they go? So Anthony and then John.
Well, actually, I had similar thoughts about the conversation we just had, so we don't have to rehash it. But I just want to be clear that we would be doing this regardless of COVID. This has nothing to do with COVID at all. This is something that needs to be done.
That's correct.
Just want to be clear on that.
That's why we have that short term.
Right.
To get us, how do we get back here in January? Which may set the tone or set some decisions to help us in the long term.
Right.
So I'm just going to throw this little monkey wrench out. If in the long term we say, okay, we can put a floor on top of the cafeteria. When the cafeteria was built, when that addition was built in the late 80s, that was built to hold another floor on top of the cafeteria. But if you do that, the mechanical and air handling systems, the mechanical systems are on top of the roof of the cafeteria. So all of that would have to get moved.
Right.
And would that get moved to that new floor, which then puts it close to the houses that are behind the State House?
And I just met with one of our neighbors who's not happy about sound.
If you decide to build out from either side of the State House, that impacts the visibility of the State House. And we have a Capitol Complex Commission that is made up of folks from the city of Montpelier that would weigh in. So there's layers to all of this. It's not simple, just to lay the groundwork. Can I go to John first and then do you?
Go ahead.
John?
I had a couple questions. One is when we're talking about upgrading and renovating the HVAC system, are we talking about ductwork? Is the ductwork we have to tear down ceilings and walls, or is it ductwork to the rooms?
It's the whole shebang. So if we have to, so for example, to get more air into a room, typically you have to upgrade your duct, right? Because you need to be able to get that air through the duct. So the more air you want to, put through, the bigger the duct that you need. So showing that right now you have rooms, right, that don't meet airflow, it means you're going to also need to, am I going wrong, Tay? Go ahead, Tay.
So we don't know. airflow that we're showing on that evaluation is outside air that's blended in the air handler and then delivered to the space.
Right.
One solution might be to make the air handler more robust so it can handle more air because there's enough air to handle the temperature control currently available. So we may not have to change ducts. We may have to change a few. We may have to change them all. We won't know that until October.
Are there ducts in the walls in the committee rooms?
Tay, did you hear that question?
The distribution for the committee rooms and the annexes in the city ceiling plate space above each, actually below each floor, it comes to those induction units. And there's a large.
It's hard to understand you, Tay.
Sometimes it's easy to hear.
You're cutting in, you're cutting out, it comes across as a mumble.
Sometimes though, Tay, you're really clear, so I don't know if it's how close you are to your microphone.
It may be. So in the committee rooms in the annex, the distribution ductwork distributes to the floor below you. And there are two risers that are in the corners of a couple of the rooms. There's a large return plenum between the corner room on the northwest corner and the next adjacent room that brings the return air back to the mechanical room.
Can I give an example, Tay, if you will allow me to? So what are the little boxes on the walls called? Are those the induction units or what's the technical name of those?
Correct.
Okay, yay, I got it right. I'm not a mechanical engineer, I'm a civil, just so you know. Tay's mechanical. So for example, if we want to be more flexible with your space over time, rather than putting in those units that are along the wall, because now it's strapped to a wall and now you want to take that wall down, that's a problem. We can think more globally about doing something in the ceiling instead, which then means in the future, if you decide you want to take down a wall, now you don't have to move that unit, right, that was next to the wall. So we can be strategic, right, as we plan this project to make sure that it allows for flexibility over time for you.
The ductwork piece obviously relates to how disruptive the project is. Right. The other question I had, you mentioned contractors. How can a contractor bid on a project until it's fully designed?
That's an excellent question. So construction managers bid on design, and then they have a chance to bid on construction. So the way it works is they'll bid, and they basically bid for how much am I going to pay you, right, for providing me with these design services, for lack of a better term, and they'll give you a quote, right? And then usually we do quality based, so it's based on cost, but it's also typically based on level of expertise, experience, things like that. Specialty areas. What happens is it's during the design process at the various phases that Representative Alice Emmons talked about, schematic design, design development, construction documents, they bid the project. And as part of their initial proposal, they tell you how much they're going to make on top of whatever they're going to bid on the project. So the contractor may say, and it's all open book, so we can see exactly how the bids are coming in for the subs and things like that. But long and short is, they basically get paid, their profit is put into the contract. So they'll make 8% in addition to basically what it's going to cost them to construct the project. And we get to have open book. So we actually we can find out, what is that unit cost you? What are you paying your sub? So it's all open book. We can look at everything, but really what their profit is the amount that we've agreed upon. Could be 8%, could be 6%, but that is how, and just to be clear, if at the end, we're not happy with their bid and we say, well, geez, we think you're being too expensive for whatever reason, we can walk away from the construction manager and we can go out for a traditional bid and hire a traditional contractor. But typically speaking with construction manager, right, it's a relationship you have with them. They've been working with you all along, and because it's open book, it's all very honest about what they're spending and then what their profit is going to be. Tay, did I miss anything on that?
Nope.
Okay, just making sure. He keeps me honest, so I just want to make sure.
Thank you.
Okay, Joe.
I think everybody here is beginning to understand the complexity of the mechanical problems of the building and the timing that's related to all of these planning, designing, and construction problems. But this committee's first charge is to come up with a report by the 15th of August on what we need to do. And short-term wise, I'm going to put in my plug here that we need to seriously think about going back to the legislature the same way we left it, with some modifications. We can talk about vaccine passports. We can talk about the need to have chairs evacuate their committees once an hour or whatever the case may be, in order to try to keep as best airflow as possible. But the other thing that we haven't talked about yet is the actual work product of the legislature. With each of these conversations, people in the building have to move somewhere. And I'll give you an example that I learned about in this process. Where's Bobby Starr's committee room going to be? He has the smallest room in the building. Okay, we could move him over to room 9, which is the current mail room. If you've been to the mail room lately, you'll notice there's no mailboxes in there. There's a couple of tables and chairs, but the upshot is that's a very big room now. But where are people going to hang their coats? Well, the conversation was that Tony in the copy room is going to have to move his copiers because they are exceeding the air quality, whatever you want to call it, in that small space that he's in. Should that become either Bobby Starr's committee room, or is that where we're now going to hang our coats? Because if you haven't heard this question yet, we don't have any idea where any of you are going to hang your coats when you walk in the building. I'm happy to say in the Senate, there are 30 hooks in the Senate cloakroom. That's where we can hang our coats. But everybody else is a big question mark. So we have to make a decision and come up with a report by August 15th as to what we are going to do, which brings me back to the original statement. And I know nobody wants to think about this, but we have to seriously think about going back into the building the way we left it, with certain modifications that we can handle in the short term, or we continue operating in a Zoom world, which I don't think any of us want to do.
But that is one of the options Alice gave us, is going back.
It is one of the options. I don't think it's an option that anybody wants.
And I would just say on that coat room, it's the book bags that are the killer. I mean, it's the school, it's not just us, it's the public.
Okay, a room like this one, where the kids have to walk across the parking lot, this could be used for book bags. This could be used for their congregating places. Those kinds of things, they're very valid concerns, Allison, but we do have the space available to try to adjust that. And from my perspective, this is really the conversation we need to be having to develop an August 15th.
John?
Just add though that going back to the Zoom world isn't a given because we need legislative approval to do that.
In each chamber.
In each chamber. So just because it's an option does not mean that we would be able to do that. It's not that simple.
We don't make the choice, though. We only make a recommendation.
Right. Yep.
Ruth?
I agree with Joe that we should be focusing on our August 15th report. And I think that as long as we have extra space and we can come up with protocols that we all feel comfortable with regarding vaccinations and school groups and those kinds of things, then we can go back without having, and we haven't gotten to the technology stuff too, because I think if we have good technology, it might cut down on the number of people in our committee rooms, you know, having more people testifying by Zoom. And so maybe we could hear about the technology options as well.
So we have a half hour left. So that's the direction I was going in, was talking. How do we come back in January and what's the technology needs for that? And then what I also want to have time to discuss is what documents do committee members want that we've talked about today? And a schedule for our meetings.
Yeah.
And what topics people really want to do the deep dive in for the August 15th report. Remember, we've got some short-term and some long-term discussions. Does that make sense to folks? So be thinking what documents you want as background information, and then we can work and get that out to you. Okay? Kevin, do you want to start talking about the IT situation, where you are in ordering equipment and what you've been working on? And if we do overflow space, we need to really figure out how we define overflow. That's going to be important for your world.
For the record, Kevin Moore, Director of IT for the legislature. To make an incredibly complicated conversation a little bit more complicated, we'll layer on the IT aspect of things. Pre-pandemic, we operated on more or less a strict prohibition of video conferencing in the committee process. Generally speaking, we do not appreciate a roundtable conversation. We want to sit across from people as we are today, shake hands, have that face-to-face conversation. And so those technologies weren't nearly as developed as they could have been pre-pandemic within the State House. Going forward, we have 4 real timeframes that we're taking into consideration. The first one is the return of joint committees, July 15th. We more or less have an understanding of what is the expectation for July 15th, which is taking everything from Zoom land in a pandemic timeline, everything we've learned, and incorporating that virtual world into our physical world. That's everything from closed captioning, hearing assistance, remote testimony, et cetera. One of the challenges that we face being in a hybrid model is camera angles. If you look today, we have a single point of view camera. Mike is manually moving it in order to ensure that we give the best video quality to those that are watching remotely. However, that is not always the best option when you're talking about a committee space. We are evaluating multiple other technologies, both for small rooms, medium rooms, and really the joint hearing size rooms like room 11. You can't cover those spaces and provide a good video quality to remote participants or observers with a single camera. How do we cover those spaces? That's really the big question we're working through right now. Timeline wise, we have July 15th, then we move into October. Maybe we do or don't have a session in October, but we certainly have to be prepared for that. Then we look at January. Are we, and at this point it's absence a direction, are we taking all of that virtual world that we've learned over the last 14, 15 months and incorporating every aspect of that into our physical world? Are we live streaming? Are we just streaming? Are we archiving as well as we have? Are we doing just audio? Is it video as well? What about the chambers? The House chamber is an enormous project in its own right. The Senate chamber is less in space and scale, but still as equally complex. Then you start working your way down to the Senate hallway, and we try to work with David and historical preservation in mind at all times. I hope we do a good job most of the time, but we probably are at odds every now and again. Where do we put 65-inch screens in Senate institutions? Where are we putting this technology? How are we integrating it into the space? What's the expectation? What are the policy implications of all of the above? I certainly don't want to answer those policy questions. That's well above my pay grade. But who starts the live stream and when? Senate institutions took some testimony from the media about quorum discussions, whether or not to start a live stream in the current Zoom world or not. And there's some very passionate points of view surrounding that. But these are all questions that impact what we do for technology integration. And depending on which specific timeline you're discussing, our recommendations may change depending on what you're looking to do and how much time we have left as a buffer to implement and integrate those decisions. Where we stand right now is an incredibly tight time frame. If we are looking to incorporate everything from our virtual world into our physical world for January, we need to know where, as soon as practical. Understanding that this committee is charged with the recommendation and that we are at least at August 15th, and we're not going to understand that fully until after August 15th, it can still give us some basis of planning. If the strong recommendation of this committee, just as an example, is to go back to the State House as we were pre-pandemic, then we can start putting together scope of work, equipment list for the spaces that we understand. If we're looking to incorporate other buildings into this legislative envelope, we have to understand those spaces. And again, each space has its unique challenges, whether it's line of sight, we have structural columns in certain locations. So the virtual side of it, we have to take that into consideration. Room capacity, public participation, media, all of those really impact what we do. Overflow spaces, as Representative Evans pointed out a moment ago. If we're putting if we're not allowing public to freely enter the building, or media, freely enter the building at will to observe whatever committee they choose at any given point, how are we providing that access to them? Again, this is primarily a policy decision that impacts technology. If we are putting them in an offsite location or offering an offsite location, are we live streaming all committees at all times in a certain location that has, again, a defined capacity for that space? Are we providing something a little more in line with, let's say, a library, a local library, where you get 15-minute window or a 30-minute window to sit down at a kiosk and get to select your committee of choice? What happens when, and this is more in the Sergeant at Arms lane, so forgive me, Janet, what happens when somebody was not permitted into the building, they've been placed in an overflow location, somebody has now left the building has capacity, the State House, who's first in line? How do we notify them? All of these components really unravel quickly depending on which direction we go. So the most important for us is short-term, October. What do we expect if we're coming back for a session in October? Medium term, January is what I'm defining as medium term. And then ultimately, what do we want technology to look like in the legislature 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And our recommendations will change and evolve depending on how these conversations go. Short term is very, very different than long term.
Questions?
Do the air systems affect your IT at all?
It does. So the existing server infrastructure we have within the building, within the State House itself, is in the basement, multiple locations in the basement. We actually had a humidity trigger yesterday. We had 70% relative humidity, which is really bad for electronic equipment. And it was due to a door being propped open for contractors to be able to work. It's a common occurrence, but it's not an acceptable location for technology that we rely on. One of the things that happened during the Capitol Bill process this year was the acquisition of what used to be a portion of what used to be the ADS data center in 133 is in the next, keep me honest here, time frame wise, 18-ish months, we'll be looking to move and relocate all of our core infrastructure out of the State House into a properly designed data center location. There's still some time between here and there. We don't want to make a temporary move. We find it to be unnecessary, and we're used to, at this point, operate in the conditions that we're in. But it very much affects equipment. It affects the copy room, as we talked about. So copy room does fall underneath legislative IT. Whether it's air quality for the person in that space or air quality for the consumables we have. We've had to throw out various consumables in the past because of humidity challenges in that building. Regardless if you keep the product wrapped in its original packaging or not, we've had to throw out archival grade paper, tumblers that have gelled up on us before, and various other supplies. The air quality of the space is less than ideal because it's so compact. It's plenum rated space, so it's really hard to maintain climate in that location because you're competing with the rest of the building. It has a large but residential grade air conditioner that tries to keep it honest, supplemented by a freestanding dehumidifier, supplemented by an exhaust system that is supposed to help pull some of that ozone out of that space. It gets warm and the air is unhealthy over time when all of those machines are running. And then you bring into the operational aspect of that particular space. When a machine breaks down, how do we continue to operate while a machine needs to be serviced? We're meeting minimum requirements for those pieces of equipment as we stand. We can't increase our capacity of that room unless we were to increase our footprint.
Allison?
So Kevin, how can we use your short term, the July 15th deadline of joint committees meeting together in the State House to be guinea pigs for what we may want to do and actually may want to incorporate in our August 15th report? So we have, and I think you've come to some decisions about how to incorporate technology in those live participation and remote hybrid meetings. So I hope and I assume, given how clever you are, that we will be using that from July 15th onward as sort of a guinea pig for what we then may be recommending in August and then for January, October, and then January.
That is very much our internal thought process as well, is that's our proof of concept, are these 4 rooms. We expect changes and modifications after initial use of those spaces, whether it's, again, camera angles, sound quality, whether it's microphones or speakers in those spaces. Room 10 and 11 have existing PA systems and existing hearing assistance technologies. We're going to do our best to leverage those if we can. If not, we have to make sure that we're prepared with supplemental hearing assistance and PA systems. Rooms 9, which is roughly the same size as room 10, does not have any integrated systems. Do we need them? We probably don't need a PA system in there, but hearing assistance, perhaps. You can make your way over to room 24, which is the legislative lounge, similar in size to room 11. Also doesn't have any existing integrated technology. So there's no PA system, there's no hearing assistance. We're making the assumption that we have to provide that at notice, hopefully not too short of notice, but with some notice to make sure everybody who needs to has the ability to participate in that process. We'll keep room 11 as the subject at this point. We're providing multiple 65-inch screens, multiple sets of speakers, multiple sets of microphones, multiple cameras depending on angle as well to perhaps shoot picture-in-picture. So for example, you could have the committee as the large screen and then a small square in there as your witness who's in person engaging with the committee. But for those participating remotely, that you see both the witness and the committee at the same time. Smaller rooms, we may be able to take advantage of newer technology, which provides a 360-degree view using a fisheye lens. But because you're using a fisheye lens, you're going to sacrifice video quality. Starts in, let's say, 4K or 1080, and then in software, it has to correct all of that on the fly, so you don't have that weird angle, rounded faces or structure in the room, and it downgrades that video quality to say 720. Now, on a screen in let's say your home television, you're not going to notice the difference. When you start talking screens of this size, providing remote participation, all of a sudden that video quality really matters. And so we've struggled with 360-degree dynamic cameras and anything larger than, say, a Senate committee room or the smaller House committee room. And we want to, if at all possible, avoid the single wide angle view of the entire committee just as a static view. We'd like to make it as dynamic as possible. And final point, I'd be remiss to not mention it, is we are not AV specialists. The IT department, as currently defined, as currently comprised, we move data across wires. While we very much converge with AV from time to time, that's not our explicit area of expertise. So we're working with other folks. We're working with existing technologies. We're working with the National Conference of State Legislature subgroup with other IT departments to figure out what other states have done. And it almost always, not always, but almost always comes back to live people, camera operators, or multiple pan, tilt, zoom cameras mounted in locations that are controlled outside of that space in a production quality location. So we don't have that space in the State House currently. Who would be controlling it? Who would make the decisions again when it's on or off? And how do we notify the committee that you're on a hot mic or that you're live? Because that's important. These rooms are used for side conversations. throughout the day, even when there isn't a live committee in that space. We want to be sensitive to all these different aspects and dynamics. And again, incorporating everything historical preservation wise as best as humanly possible.
Okay. So I see on the screen, speaking video, we have Representative Janet Ansel that's joined us. Welcome, Janet. Had quite a conversation.
Sorry that I'm late.
No, that's fine.
Can I just jump in? This is actually very interesting. This is the first time I've been on a Zoom hybrid meeting where I'm on Zoom and everybody else is together. I can tell you that it's challenging.
And what is challenging about it, Janet? Is it seeing our whole table and seeing who's who?
It's partly that, think about it, that we have always done our work in a room around a table. That's our model. But when you're broadcasting something, the witnesses in this case over on the side, so you can't really see the witness and you can't really see the people who are listening to the witness. It's just, anyway, it's interesting. And I encourage anybody who's trying to think about these things to watch the YouTube of something like this. And I think it helps sort of troubleshoot what kinds of issues we're going to confront if we use a hybrid model. But I'm thrilled to be here on Zoom. I couldn't have made it any other way.
Right.
But again, I'm sorry that I'm late.
Well, to Janet's, where is the camera underneath Janet? The camera's right there, yeah. And you're manipulating it, Mike, by that. Okay, great.
And you don't see Mike, Janet, because he's over on the other end of the.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's just it's instructive about what the challenges are going to be for people, I think.
So Janet, when we started, I did go around the room and have people introduce themselves, and I did introduce that you are a member, and you were also a member of the Joint Management Committee, which our recommendations will go to. And also indicated you were tied up with another committee meeting this morning.
Yeah, thank you.
So welcome. Joe?
So I'm going to come back to the fact that we have a report due August 15th that has to come up with recommendations. As everybody is now aware, the decisions that have to be made on the long term especially are impossible to deal with between now and August 15th. Which means we really ought to be concentrating and focusing the efforts of this group on what can we do for making recommendations on August 15th. I'm going to throw this out on the table just because it's the kind of conversation we need to be talking about in baby steps. Right now, room 9, the present mailroom/coat room, has been evacuated of all things except committee room tables and chairs. Should that remain a coat room? It's a simple question, but the more you think about it, every single one of us has to do something with our coats when we walk in the door, as does every member of the public. So where are we going to hang our coats? Should we revert it back to being a coat room? Keeping in mind, this committee's conversation is only to make a recommendation. I think I'd like to make a motion. We bring it back to being a coat room and allow people that at least ease of mind to go forward knowing they have a place to hang their coats. Again, it's only a recommendation from this committee, but it's for the purpose of driving some conversation.
Senator Benning, I know we've had a lot of conversations and trips around the State House looking at the coat room. From my perspective, in order to, depending on what standards we're going to come back in January, the House committee rooms are too small in some cases if we decided to go with the Ashrae Standards. So room 9 would be one of the possibilities to move a House committee because of the little bit, well, actually, it may have to be, I can't say exactly what room it would be used for, but I think it's a room right in the middle of the State House that we would probably use as a House or Senate committee and put the coat somewhere else.
Well, as you know, Janet, you and I have had these conversations. When you make a decision to do X, Y and Z fall into the next conversations, and we haven't got the ability to arrive at anything other than what amounts to is a crisis of paralysis, because we haven't been able to accomplish anything. We need to start accomplishing things.
So hang on here. It's a good way to move, really move us to get off the dime. So let's really start vetting some things out here. So Allison, Ruth, and Butch.
I just think that's premature. I mean, I think it's a great thing for us to consider, but we're just at our first meeting and we haven't all even had a chance to see all the options. And I would feel more comfortable making that decision. I just think that's a little premature. I mean, maybe one meeting too premature. So that's all.
Ruth, and then Butch, and then Anthony.
Yeah, I agree. I hear your sentiment about wanting to move us toward a report, but I think it's premature to make that decision. There are other rooms that are possibly better coat rooms. You yourself mentioned the Senate cloakroom is a perfect place for senators to be required to put our stuff. There might be options for House members and then an option for the public, even having 3 different locations in smaller spots to reserve that bigger room for committee work. I personally would like to see our committee rooms, especially some of them, be bigger rooms. This is a great room. Why can't we use this room? I mean, I know there are security concerns, but I think we need bigger committee rooms. Our committee rooms are so small. And so if that's an option and we can find a place to put coats somewhere else, I don't want to make that decision today.
Butch, and then Anthony.
So, Senator, thank you for making the motion because it's created good discussion. I can't support your motion, but I could support a motion that says we should have a coat room. And then give us some time to work through the logistics of a coat room.
Yeah, we need one.
I appreciate the comments, and Madam Chair, to move things along, I'm happy to withdraw the motion. But not because I think I'm going to lose the motion. I think that the conversations we are having need to start taking a focus, just like we have just had. Because if we try to wrestle with when the hammers are going to be dropping, heading in addition to the cafeteria, we are going to be paralyzed going forward. We've got to start small and baby steps. Thanks for the conversation.
Anthony, and then I'll
This might be a mini sort of part of the conversation, but I don't know whether this is totally unusual, but I bring my coat and I hang it up in the committee room.
We don't do that in the house.
Yeah, I presume you
I'm
don't.
sorry.
Is that uncommon?
We don't have room.
We can't do it in the hallways.
We do it in
either.
ours too.
You can try it in the hallways, but it just jams people up together.
I don't even use a coat room in years.
Well,
I mean, other than to get my mail.
Well, that's because one of your committee rooms is close to the door.
Right.
Easy access.
Right.
There's a different experience, I think, between the Senate members and House members.
Yes.
It's totally different parts of the building in this.
Yeah, but even if the senators kept their, I'm not saying this is practical, but just as a thought, if senators kept their coats in their committee rooms, then that would take some of the pressure off wherever the new coat room is.
A lot of the senators already do keep their coats
Right.
in the Senate rooms. The issue within the coat room is, number one, is the mail. And we've looked at different ways. House Institutions Committee last year looked at different ways of distributing the mail, working with our Sergeant at Arms, and we sort of had a plan in place, and then COVID happened. The other issue with the coat rooms, we have a lot of the public coming in, and there was thought of possibly having, and Joe mentioned this, having an off-site place, either 133, maybe 4 Aiken, 133. School group coming in, they exit the bus, they go to that specific spot, there's restrooms there, they can drop their coats, they can drop their backpacks, there's an orientation there, then they can walk up to the State House. Those, or if there's advocacy days, you know, we always have big days for advocates. That particular site could be used for them, again, to meet in, deposit their coats, their boots, have their initial meeting, and then come up to the State House. So those are the mechanisms that we're looking at, that then you really look at, where do the 150 members put their boots and their coats and
Their shoes. And they're static clean. I mean, I'd say there are differences between men and women.
We should meet in the summer and then we would eliminate.
But we don't meet in the summer. We mostly better.
So I just wanted to echo a few statements that I've heard today. So Senator Benning, you're spot on. We need to focus on the short term first, right? Because once you start going medium and long, we're going to start just kind of swirling, and it's going to be a lot harder to meet the deadline of August 15th and coming up with a short term plan. I also want to support Janet. Really what you want to do here is you want to look at various alternatives, and Janet laid out 4 at the very beginning of this meeting, which I think is a great place to start. And Stephen Fry, who is sitting to my right, is a planning architect. And so his job actually is to make sure that spaces function for you and they work for you based on the function that you perform. So my recommendation to the committee would be to leverage Stephen Fry and to start working off of Janet's alternatives. She mentioned 4 in the beginning. And then with each alternative, you can have a pros and a cons list of each alternative, right? And then that will allow you guys to have some dialogue about what are the things you're meeting or not meeting based on which alternative you're looking at. And that's something that we can start right away. The only thing that we would need at BGS is to have a point of contact, because part of what Stephen needs to do is basically do interviews, because he has to understand how you function and how you work in order to be able to lay out spaces, right, that will provide for your programmatic outcomes that you're looking for. So my recommendation would be identify what alternatives you want to take a look at, and give us a point of contact to work with as the main point of contact. And then we can get Stephen off and running and start to do some work for you.
So this is what's going through my mind at this point. Just put this out on the table. So Janet has already sent to us the 4 options that she put out. And it's only use the State House and follow HVAC room limitations. That's the other one. Use State House and 109 as options. Use the State House 109 and 133, or you totally ignore the other one. And she also has the pros and cons.
The ones that we came up with.
Did you email that?
I just did. Or I didn't email, it's on the website,
on our
right, Mike?
website.
I just sent it to you.
So that would be one starting point for folks. The other piece, and I don't know what your schedule is, Stephen, but I think what the commissioner just said would be really important. And I don't know whether or not to include the Arts Council, the Historical Society, Friends of the State House in this, but an interview of at least all the legislative members to get a feel of the flow and how we operate, because there are differences between the Senate, there's differences between the Senate and House, there's differences in those committee rooms, and there's even differences within some of the committee rooms.
Absolutely.
And if that could be set up before our next meeting, you could have those interviews, would be terrific.
Right, and I'll just jump in real fast, keep it brief. I've kind of done these kinds of project approaches before, and I'm really glad that you're talking about the interview process and kind of understanding the key stakeholder information and drivers. I think of it almost like what is the customer experience journey of all the different groups, and in a way, it's a multi-layer situation where there's many factors flowing together, and there are rhythms happening from it. It's almost a musical type of thing over the course of the year. You have different rhythms happening with different people, different groups, different kinds of pushes and pulls. I need to learn about that as quickly as possible, all the while keeping in mind we got to get somewhere by the 15th of August, and I won't necessarily be able to get in the weeds on everything because that will need to be tabled for later, but I really need to get it like big impressions, and I think that'll be great. And once I do that, I also want to listen for guiding assumptions and principles for what are our overarching operating goals for this short-term project and then the longer-term project. And then the grading of the options. Janet, thank you so much for putting at least something out there. There's maybe a couple more or mixture of some. But what I do see is almost like a matrix, putting all the options out, having different key factors that work with each other. And then you've kind of, it's not as simple as I make it to be, but basically you figure out where the opportunities and strengths and easy places to go, and maybe there'll be a good solution at the bottom. I just don't know what it is, but I know that if we do like a data-driven, informed process quickly, we can get somewheres. And I think part of it is how often do we meet? I like to work in an iterative way, so not exactly going to solve everything in a week's time, but maybe if we meet next week or the week after, whatever that rhythm is, I can respond to that, and with other things that I'm also working on too.
So that's another good segue. So for this, today is what, Tuesday? So could you, Stephen, start the interview process this week with the members here?
I will defer to my commissioner.
So he can. The other thing he's working on is all the Montpelier moves, like us moving to 133 and then subsequent moves as well. So yes, he can. He just has to balance that with other work he's working on.
So we need to make sure that Stephen has all of our contact information, our phone numbers, our emails. So that, and maybe, I don't know, what's the best way to go about, so you don't have to call everybody and say you're available.
Mike has everything. Mike has all our
No,
contact.
Mike has all that contact information, but to actually set up the time
Right.
to connect with the person is what I was saying, is I don't know how we want to go about doing that, so Stephen doesn't have to call each one of us and say, you available?
Yeah, I think probably want to use, if there's someone I can leverage to, maybe I'll say I'm going to set up a day to do all my interviews, or 2 days, or like an afternoon on both this day and that day. Who can I sign up on what day?
Yeah.
That might be easy.
So would you send that out, or is that going to be sent to Mike Ferrant for Mike to send out? Which is the easier way to do this? To send-
So we also have Junie Bruno in the mix. So it's really up to the committee's preference in terms of how we want to do it. I think that Stephen shouldn't be he should identify time he's available, but he shouldn't be the scheduler, because it's a lot of logistics to work out. And I don't want Stephen spending his time on that.
Why don't you ask Mike to do a doodle poll so that all of us can advise when our best times available are, and then let Steve know what the results of that are.
And we could do 2-hour timeframes, and then he could get a couple interviews there.
But do that, have dates available between now and the beginning of next.
Yeah, but I mean, then he can interview.
When is our next meeting?
Well, that's.
That's where she's going. And my only other question would be to you, Janet, and to the committee, which is, so interviews for these folks, are there other people you would like us to interview in addition to the people here?
That, I think Janet and I just spoke about this.
Okay.
It might be worth spending next meeting, having folks come in from our legislative council, from our joint fiscal office, from the media. That's the next piece. That's the next piece I want to get.
Okay.
I think there's going to be the need for a lot of meetings here.
Yeah.
Between now and the middle of August. I'm willing to do this. I'm thinking it might be a meeting a week to get us going. What's people's availability next week?
Except for fireworks.
So is it?
We don't get any fireworks in Montpelier.
We've really got to.
We do.
Buckle down and do some of this, and I would really encourage coming face to face if we can do it.
How about Tuesday, the 29th? Or Wednesday, the 30th?
Blue Ridge Parkway here.
Yeah, I know, you're gone.
I could make the afternoon of the 29th.
Afternoon of the 29th? What day of the week is that? Tuesday?
It's Tuesday.
Afternoon of the 29th, that's our veto session's over?
Today's Tuesday. Okay.
Like late afternoon, Joe, like 4 to 6?
That's where it feels like a week.
That's a little late. Is it? That's late.
Coming here.
That's late.
Yeah, if we're coming here, then.
No.
Remember, we have the longest days until.
But people may have commitments back home.
Right.
And people working, usually state people work till about 4:30.
I have my other summer study thing is in the morning of the 29th. It goes until noon.
About 1 o'clock.
So if we did 1 to 4 or whatever, 1 to 3.
I'd rather do 1 to 4, get a good 3 hours. Does that work for folks on the 29th?
Works for me.
And I get to reschedule my chiropractor.
Might have a thing that I had to do, but I'll try. It was just a brother visiting me that I haven't seen in many years, so.
Bring him
He's
here.
happened to be
He'll have
coming
fun.
on that
Yeah,
day.
he's here.
Yeah,
But he's coming hopefully for a few days.
attended, so he's used to all these competing projects.
With your brother.
Well,
Can I
I'll
just
figure
jump
it
in
out.
and say that there's a question on the Zoom screen?
Oh, okay, I didn't see it. Who has the question?
I've had my hand up. I guess this is the problem with the hybrid.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have your hand up on your screen or on the participant list?
On my screen.
Oh, I don't see it.
It doesn't show up on there. It shows up on here.
Okay, so sorry, Steve.
Not a problem, and it goes back a number of discussion points, but just with the idea of interviewing just legislative members. I don't know about Karen, but we certainly have a lot of interplay with the State House, with the Historical Society Museum. I mean, that's regardless of the preservation side of things. But just when you talk about how school kids move through the space, where they store their coats, how they store their coats, they often visit us first. So whether I speak to that or put you in touch with one of my educators, I think it's a big part of that, how that space is used. So just wanted to make sure that we're included in that.
And Karen, you would be fine to be included?
Oh, I'm fine to be included in the conversation. I have a board meeting on the 29th, so I won't be able to make that meeting, but I can get caught up later.
But you're fine to be interviewed, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's do an interview for everyone. I just wasn't sure on folks that didn't work in the State House on a regular basis, that's all. For that. So is Tuesday, the 29th, 1 to 4 still an option, or is Wednesday, the 30th better for folks?
Easy either way.
Joe's gone.
You're gone, Joe.
But I know enough, so I'm not going to worry.
I could do either one.
Somebody's got to make a motion to get us started, so you ought to be here.
I'm out of town on Tuesday, the 29th, and it sounds like Karen's unavailable on the 29th as well.
Are you,
Well,
is it better on Wednesday, the 30th? Morning, afternoon?
Wednesday is terrible for me, but
Until we do something where we can all respond on maybe a doodle poll for the next schedules after this one, we're never all going to be available.
All going to be available.
And so I would encourage us
Send
to.
out a doodle poll for Tuesday afternoon, the 29th from 1 to 4, and then Wednesday, the 30th.
Can't we just do that right now around the table, see which
Yeah,
one's
I
better?
mean,
Okay, we were spinning. That's why I offered the doodle poll.
And I would say, please don't schedule around me. I'm happy to be caught up later.
How about you, Janet? Because you missed this first one.
I'm okay on the 29th. I can't do the afternoon of the 30th, but I can do the morning.
And we can always interview, I mean, we're going to be interviewing folks, so to Steve Perkins' point, I mean, he's going to be interviewed whether it's in the committee or outside, but you're going to get interviewed, Steve.
Let's do Tuesday, the 29th from 1 to 4.
Okay.
I'm making an executive decision.
I like it.
and then maybe for the subsequent meetings, we could get a doodle poll so that we could all be on the same page.
So what would be agenda items? What would folks really want to focus on? We're going to focus on the short term. What documents do you want for the short term focus, if any? Ruth?
Is there any way we could get a map or some kind of visual of the space we're talking about? So when we're talking about the rooms, we can point to them. That would
All
be
report.
all the spaces that we're talking about. That would be really helpful for me
If
to
you have access to
visualize
the
it.
Freeman report.
Is it in that? I do have access.
All of the building is set out.
It's in there. Okay, good.
But it would be good to have a bigger
Yeah.
It would be really good even to have something up on a wall or a tripod, and we can start.
We can coordinate that with Janet. We can do some big layouts. I would also recommend the 3 reports that Freeman French Freeman has done over the last 4 years. Because I do think that it's really helpful and it provides a baseline for just thoughts about how the state could be utilized or other requirements that folks would like the State House to offer. So I think those 3 reports would be very helpful.
And I just happened to have yesterday found the presentation boards from the big Feingold Alexander study for the State House expansion. So I'll bring those. These are big
Yeah, but when was that?
visuals that were done for that expansion
That was,
that you could just look at.
but the expansion, the original expansion or the one that 2005 expansion?
5.
Okay.
2005.
Yes, the Judy Livingston.
Yes.
Yeah. What we did with Judy.
Alice?
Yeah.
I really think at our next meeting, we need to concentrate on the 4 options that Janet presented to us. Make a decision on one of those 4 options, and that might inform us on how we want to move forward.
But I guess from my perspective, I'm big on planning and I'm big on alternatives analysis. So what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to make a decision so quickly that you don't have the opportunity to vet. I get we have a timeline we're marching to, and I'm really good. I'm a project manager at heart, so I know how to march to a timeline. But I would recommend to the committee that it might be too early for you to make a decision next week on one particular alternative without sort of doing the due diligence.
That's fine, Jennifer. We haven't even discussed any of them seriously yet, so not necessarily making a decision, but have a lengthy discussion on those 4 options are pretty straightforward.
So are you saying, and look at those 4 options and we really, for each one, we have a real lengthy discussion of the pros and cons?
Right.
And okay, I agree with that. I'm just thinking, who's going to keep track of all this to help us? Mike is running everything. I mean, we're going to have
Have a drafts person.
we got to
Becky
have
is
a
that
drafts person to really help us with this.
Becky's listening
And
still.
Becky offered her services today. She finished for the year yesterday. She has an addition to her family coming.
Congratulations.
And she's going to be tied up with 3 little children.
So exciting.
And you never know that
You
when you're
never
on
know,
Zoom.
but Becky's a great resource,
Yeah.
but she is going to have a focus in her family from now until January.
So is she taking a leave?
Ledge Council will have coverage for the committee over the summer, so that should not be a problem.
Do you know who it might be at all?
No, but I was waiting to see how often the committee was planning on meeting, and then we can figure out who would be the most appropriate person to cover.
Yeah, I think we're going to be meeting a lot between now and August, is my hunch.
I just want, congratulations, Becky. That's awesome. I agree with Jennifer or Commissioner Fitch about that it's too premature, but I also think we should start digging into the conversation. At one point, we mentioned Stephen interviewing or getting testimony from other people besides legislators. And I think that's important to the other people that use the State House. I'm assuming you can talk about the pages, but the school group, Stephen, you mentioned you had educators or somebody you could talk to. I was thinking would the NEA or other people who might be able to speak on behalf of teachers bringing people into the building.
Angelica Catarino is our school tours coordinator.
Okay.
So Angelica definitely with the Vermont Historical Society, she makes all the arrangements. So that's an in-house thing that we can provide, and we'll have Stephen interview her as well as VHS to get the full picture. But I totally agree with you, Senator, that I think all of this interviewing needs to inform, right? So it kind of depends on how fast the interviewing goes with all of the constituent groups that we can think of, the press.
Right, the press is really important.
press
They have
as well.
specific technology needs and things
So
like
let me
that.
interject here, because this is getting to be pretty large.
Right.
For Steve to do.
Sure.
It is out of his jurisdiction as BGS.
Sure.
He's going to be talking to the press, he's going to be talking to advocate groups, he's going to be talking to Joint Fiscal Office, our legislative staff. Angelica, how do we approach this? Do we have subcommittees of our group here that would approach different sectors?
Or you suggested inviting some of them to your meetings. Is that correct?
Meetings would have to be at least 3 to 4 hour meetings, because you're talking regular committee meetings when you're having folks testifying. So that's another option out there. I just don't want to put it all on Stephen's.
Right, and it's going to be helpful to have a list advised by this committee in terms of who he should be interviewing, to the extent that we can put kind of groups together. So he's interviewing kind of more than one, but in the same category,
because that will help accelerate. I think that would be really helpful.
So I'm concerned about the time, because I know
Yep.
that Mike has to go to another committee and he has to set things up. So would folks be comfortable enough, I'm just shooting from the hip here, if Joe and I and Jana and Steve figure out the interview and figure out the schedule for who should come before our committee at our next meeting?
That'd be very helpful.
And I have an add to that. I often will send surveys, excuse me, around to people, short surveys, just getting information that way, so that if people have an opportunity to see the questions in advance and or fill things out. I use Google Forms. It can be really intuitive, fairly quick. That way I can actually build information and interview people from within their, there's going to be ways to make that work a little bit more accelerated, and I'll just share that as a possibility.
Steve, just to accelerate your interview lists,
Probably where I'm going.
Senate institutions during the last week of the session, 3 afternoons of testimony. One of press, one of lobbyists, and one of legislative staff. So they're all there, they all testified what their wants and concerns were about.
That's great. Perhaps all I need for those groups is
We're in the State House.
To review.
the YouTube.
I was going to recommend that as well. And I'm not sure if the full interviews that
French Freeman conducted for the last study were completely within that document, but if they have those somewhere, that would be another good.
I don't think they are. I think they were verbal. I don't know the documentation of the interviews.
So I know that a couple members have to move on to another committee meeting. So we're meeting next week, Tuesday, the 29th. I'm assuming we would meet in this room again.
Yeah.
Are we able? Great.
Yep.
Yeah, because the State House isn't open yet
Right.
for that. We will work on an agenda to get that out to you. We will work on getting the visual for a map that we can
help that.
put up. And Stephen, you're going to be working on the interviews of all the committee members here. And then Joe, myself, Janet, and you, Stephen, I would think, maybe not, I'm not sure, in terms of figuring out the groups that would need to come before us at our next meeting. Maybe, Stephen, you wouldn't be part of that, maybe.
I think really, for me, at least a way to answer the question about stakeholders and whether I need to be involved. It's really, if you deem a group that has significant interaction with the State House, both physically and electronically online, I guess that's another question to ask in this year's transformation of your process. Are there new stakeholder groups that you have been engaging with that are new to your body, that come from the internet in a way? And I don't know what the answer on that is, but we have face-to-face pre-COVID interaction habits and sort of ways of going about things, but then we have what we just experienced, and it may be different, and I can't speak to what the difference is on that.
I think it would be helpful if you let us know who we should interview.
Yep.
The three of us will speak and then we'll bring Stephen into the loop when we know more, a little bit of what we're doing. Does that work for members?
Yes, perfect.
I don't want to, take too much. And Janet, that's comfortable with you and Steve and whomever is out there.
And one more, and that is for Stephen to work with Mike Ferrant to give some time blocks that he's available to do interviews, and then Mike can hopefully help.
Yeah, I'll let you two, you and Mike can deal with that. Don't get us involved in that because we got enough. Anything else before we finish up on this meeting? Our first meeting. Okay, so thank you all. Thank you folks who are streaming in. Let us know, Kevin, when we're off live stream so that we can break up.
Right.